Regis was one of the key marketing architects of Apple and really had a lot to do with our success.
Steve Jobs says that when he and Steve Wozniak were trying to get their personal computer company off the ground, they turned to Regis McKenna. McKenna played important roles in everything from the design of the now famous Apple logo to directing a legendary, well-planned strategic campaign that launched the Macintosh computer.
Regis is the best strategic marketing person I know of, and that makes him one of the best strategic business people that I know. It was clear after you met him that he was the one you wanted to work with.
So that's just a bit of more time. I'm going to give you guys, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to give you some highlights. Most of this is from the web, Wikipedia, on the site. But Regis is a marketer who introduced many of the ideas that are now part of the mainstream in technology marketing. He helped launch many technical innovations of the computer age, including the first microprocessor, who Regis will tell you himself, he thinks that is more important than the work he did at Apple. Apple's first personal computer, the first recombinant DNA genetically engineered product, and the first retail computer store. The San Jose Mercury News included him on its Millennium 100 list, a roster of the 100 people who made Silicon Valley what it is today. He's been described as the man who put Silicon Valley on the map. A legendary marketer, and Newsweek once called him the Silicon Valley Svengali. You guys know the story of startups in garages? Everybody knows. So this was an article in the Los Angeles Times that said McKenna is best known for taking the story of Apple Computer's founding in a Los Altos garage by a couple of young entrepreneurs and weaving the tale into part of our national folklore. So Regis has done a lot of things, and Regis retired from the business in 2000, but he didn't retire out of the game. Okay? He's worked with Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Wozniak, all of the major players, and as of today, he's an investor and a board member of several Silicon Valley firms. He's also on the advisory board of Zoom and the international advisory board of Toyota. So Regis, even though he's not actively involved in the day-to-day workings, he still stays active in the industry. You guys remember when Apple had that antenna gate, where all those problems with the iPhone 4, the antennas weren't working? So he said Steve Jobs called him from Hawaii to come in and work on that PR crisis. So they still reach out to him, so this is a good opportunity. The plan here is for Regis to talk for an hour. He's going to talk about where we're at today, where he believes things are at. Regis pioneered real-time marketing. So he's going to talk about that, but he also said he's going to talk about a couple cool things that are happening in Silicon Valley right now. Okay? After he's done, he's going to open it up for questions. So if you have questions, I know some of our students do, just come up here so he can see you, ask the question, and he'll answer it. I just ask that during this presentation, you guys keep it down, because it's going to be hard to hear, especially when we're asking questions. And if you have to leave, do it discreetly. Just walk along the back and walk out. Do you guys have any questions before we get going?
Is this being taped at all?
I think some of the students may they're going to take some pictures and agenda over the actual taping.
Is that back door open? Is that back door open up? So if you have to leave, cool. So if you have to leave for whatever reason, and we try to do it discreetly without having to walk in front of the camera so that everybody can see everything, you just slide down the back. Just go forward. Once you're out there, we're going to clear what happens.
Probably gonna have to take her leave.
Once you're out of this room, I don't care what happens. I don't know where that room goes.
All right, guys, we're going to follow.
I don't see anything.
Scott, I don't have any sound.
Okay,
Hold on here.
can you hear me? No? Alright, hold on. Can you hear me, Regis?
No, I can't hear you. I think it might be my fault.
We can hear you. You can't hear me.
Sorry, Scott. Can you increase your sound? Scott?
How's that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can't, but I can't hear you. So what do you have to say?
Is this volume on? Well, hang up the fucking thing.
What? Yeah, I know.
Hello? You can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. It worked when we tested it yesterday, so I'm wondering if you just have an audio setting.
No, well, I can hear you, but very faint.
So what do you do, like your speakers or something like this change? I wonder if it's right here. Can you hear my talking this?
Try again.
How's now?
No.
So, what I'm gonna do is, let me just, I wonder if you have any, can you speaker volume turned all the way up there? I don't know what might
Yep. Every speaker volume's all the way up. I can hear you vaguely. So it's some speakers working. It's just like a camera.
What I'm gonna do is, I'm just gonna try to call you right back.
Okay. Let me try something else here.
Yes, okay, we're trying to reconnect.
Can you hear anything now?
Hey, we'll get this.
Yeah, we will. How about now?
Not a problem.
Can you hear me?
Let me get my technician. Go.
So, how about we do this then? If, yep.
It's probably on my end. Let me, let's just keep going, and I'll do some introduction. But I have someone who can help me here, and I'll have them come in and me while I'm doing this.
Okay, so how about what we do is, we'll go through it, and then when it comes time to question and answer, then hopefully we'll have it fix that. How's that?
Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay.
Sorry, guys.
No, I was trying to, I'm fine. Okay, let's go. Sure.
Okay, well, when I stay on the phone, I'm just gonna introduce everyone to you, this is the only way that you can hear me. I
Okay.
have the students of the advertising program here, as we discussed, they gave a good intro of who you are and what you've done, but I don't know if I've done it justice, so if you like, we can start by just giving a brief background on yourself, I guess, to the students, so they can hear it from you, and then you can get started for about an hour. When you're ready, hopefully we'll have this fixed, and we can have question and answer. If not, I'll just call you and have the students talk to you from here. How's that sound?
That sounds fine.
Perfect. All right, well, I'm gonna turn the floor over to you and hang up, and if I just hold up the phone, that means I'm gonna call you, okay?
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Good afternoon. This is a little bit different. I've never done a Skype test before, so it's a little strange. And I've also very rarely I do this without some slides or cue cards, as I call them. But I do have another computer here with some crib notes on it, so I'll be looking at that from time to time. I've been in marketing one phase or another since 1965, and so over literally close to 50 years, and I've gone through all phases of it. I started out really in the publishing business. I was hired out of college into a publishing company, publishing technical journals. And I worked for the publisher. They wanted an assistant, and so in effect, I learned over about a 2-year period. I learned just about everything there was about publishing, including layout, design, writing, editing, so forth. The only difference was that these were technical journals, and so I had to learn a little bit about technical. Well, my background was liberal arts, and so this was sort of new to me, but I really liked my science classes. I enjoyed actually learning a great deal. I spent enormous amount of time and effort educating myself on technology. Now, technology in the early 60s was a little bit different than it is today. And I'm going to give you or show you some examples of some of this. But in 1963, I came to California. Now, I moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And at that time, Pittsburgh was, an industrial city. It was the steel capital of the world. It was known as in the 40s and then 50s. And it produced a lot of this steel that, built not only buildings, but put us through wars and so forth. So it was a dirty, smoky, old industry city. And that's pretty much where I grew up. But when I moved to Silicon Valley, it was pretty much farmland when I moved out here. It really wasn't called Silicon Valley, but there was a lot of new companies, and those companies were started by young people who had left their jobs in larger industries, most of them from East Coast companies, and moved west or right out of the universities on the East Coast, came across the country, all looking for some sort of new thing to happen. And one of the very first things that I had a chance to work on in Silicon Valley, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but can you see that little device? That's a transistor. That's a single transistor. This is your little thumb drive today. It's 16 gigabytes. So that, in effect, is 16 billion of these. All something that you can carry around in your pocket. If I put 16 billion of these in your pocket, it would literally fill up the machines that you built with. You had to fill up your room. And so just the size compression that has occurred by technology has really created a different kind of world. And for those of you interested in design, it's created a whole different kind of design world. Because the machines that were designed back in those days were all done from really pragmatic reasons. They were generally big steel boxes. And of course, the first personal computers were just basically square steel boxes. And for designing something different, it really required a different kind of architecture for how you make the stuff inside. Because design today comes from the inside out, rather than the outside in. And so recreating how you really, you create that really had a lot to do with technology. Another company that I was involved in those early days was the first LED company, light emitting diodes. And here's what they were replacing. See that? That's like a glass electron tube, except that the little glass configuration in there forms the letter 9 or 6, depending upon how you configure it. So you would light up different segments of it, and it actually became sort of like a neon light. But those were in all the machines. Those were in the computers and so forth. And so your readout was done with this glass thing until they became solid state. And then the solid state ones, again, can you see that?
Yeah.
Those little segments in there are light emitting diode segments. They're gallium arsenide. And so by lighting up each of those segments, you can create a whole, all of the numbers, and you can create an alphabet. So by going, and this is lower cost to do, it doesn't heat up. These things heat it up, and so they last long. These things last long. You can embed them in things. So the whole aspect of technology, we'll get on, guys. So I'm not going to bore you with all this stuff, but I want to show you that over my period in marketing, what has really changed over the years. Today, I went from when transistors were the norm to. Hold on, there's my technician. Stop on my. Come on over. Thanks. technician's on the way. It happens to be my next door neighbor. He's anyway, my career today, one of the companies I'm involved with and have helped over the last several years produces inside these little vials are nanocrystals. So, and each of those little vials is about 2 to 3 billion nanocrystals. So moving from one of these that you had to build machines out of to essentially building technology today that's made with various forms of nano devices, we're now able to shrink the technology down to where you can create an iPhone that would have taken literally a room full of electronics to do 30, 40 years ago. So design concepts are changing radically, and more of the designers that are involved in business of almost anything from laboratory equipment to consumer products to all kinds of, as you know, computers, cell phones, and so forth, really are intimately engaged with the designers of the product itself so that they can begin to shape how the external cosmetics or the external use of the product itself and the consumer acceptance of that product becomes more part of their life. So the technology has played a big role in my life because it's changed over time, and I have sort of been involved in that technology from transistor all the way to today. Intel's microprocessors today have 2 billion transistors on them, and they're about a 1/4 inch square. So when you think about the technology created, it's called Moore's Law. I don't know how many have heard Moore's Law? Nobody? Okay, well, Moore's Law has been written about a lot. You have to read the business press, guys. But anyway, it's written about a lot. Moore's Law was developed by a guy named Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel. And Moore's Law says that the transistors on a chip of silicon or any kind of substrate are going to double every year. And that's been going on for 50 years now. 50 years, the transistors on a little piece of silicon have been doubling because the technology that makes that happen have been improving so fast. I mean, you have to realize that the total amount of science and technology knowledge today is doubling every year. Doubling every year. So the whole font of information about the science world is doubling every year. That's pretty phenomenal. Apply that to the development of various technologies, and you can begin to see why we're ending up with things that are a complete computer in your pocket. Hold on, we're going to take a quick pause. Okay. 1 second. Class, this is Walter. Hi, class.
I want to comb my hair if I don't keep going to look at me. So, can you get to explain the volume? Turn that on. That's on.
No, not on mute.
Can you guys hear us? Hello? Hello?
I think barely.
Barely?
Yeah.
What about now?
Yeah, I think it's something on your side.
Could it be this?
Casey's fault. Hold on, let me see if I can switch it.
Pull up flat.
Let me go,
You want?
Okay.
here, I'm gonna try something.
More than likely. It's
What about right now?
It's still very faint.
Okay. Scott?
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Scott.
Bye, y'all.
Scott, we'll just go on with what we were doing.
okay.
Okay. Sorry. I on my end. So, Scott had asked me my background, and then I got off on a tangent. But by and large, when I came to California, I came here to essentially open the West Coast office for that publishing company. I was 21 years old, so I was fairly young when I did that. But that enabled me to call on a lot of companies. And one of the things that I had responsibility for was selling advertising. And of course, when you're doing that, you get into the marketing departments of various companies. And my territory at that time was the West Coast. So I went from Washington State all the way down to halfway down into California. And so I called on a variety of companies. And essentially what I started doing was going in and asking a lot of questions. And I would collect their literature, and I would understand, first of all, what they were doing. And then I would come back again after having understood somewhat about what they were doing, and then try to see how what we could do in terms of advertising helped them. But in fact, it never quite really was that, in my mind, it never really helped the companies, particularly small companies, get off the ground. And I, of course, at those days, I was, I was a little bit puzzled over it. But later on, I'll explain exactly why some of the advertising and that didn't work. I changed jobs. I went with a startup called General Microelectronics, and this was the first, essentially, company to create large-scale chips, large-scale devices. And this company is one at which, they in those days, they not only made these silicon wafers and ingots, so you could go in with one end of the company and you see them growing these crystals, these large silicon crystals. But they also, after a while, began making calculators. So I watched the entire chip process being made. And it wasn't as complex as you might think, somewhat being non-technical. It was actually like working on old cars and you can see how the pistons are working. Once you sort of take the covers off, you begin to understand it a little bit better. And you say, oh, that's how it works. So I had the opportunity to watch them design the chips, build them, and it was all essentially was done with cameras and reduction and so forth. So you could understand how this was done. And then at the end, they made a calculator. And they made this calculator that reduced the number of components inside the calculator from several thousand down to 39. So calculators went from tens of thousands of parts in them. And at those days, in the 1960s, a calculator was the size of a fax machine. And it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It generally cost more than the family car. And the way people made money on their calculators was by the repairman. So the repairs were put on contract, and essentially you pay every month this guy to come in and clean it, fix it if it was broke, and so forth. And so they weren't made on making the machines because they were so complex, so big. It literally would take 2 or 3 of you to carry a calculator in the 60s. But that all went away with the chips designing it. So the design of the structure itself, the design of the calculator began to shrink down. And it really began to, essentially the calculator that we made at GME it was the first time we went out about industrial designers, and they were really thrilled to be able to design a new it looks a lot like some of the early Apple product. I was then went to a company called General Microelectronics that was it was just starting. So National Semiconductor. National Semiconductor grew to about 200 million in about 2 years I was there. And I was responsible for worldwide marketing. What that did was give me an opportunity to travel the world. And I was, that is an education in itself, because quite frankly, when you travel to different countries, you learn the culture of people. You begin exploring and talking, meeting friends, going to dinner and lunch with them and their families and so forth. And so it wasn't just the ability to sort of market in the country. It was also, for me, an opportunity to learn more about the people. I think my arts background enabled me to be more curious about those things than, say, the typical engineer. And so I got to know a lot of people around the world that way. This later on helped me because, let's say in a very practical way, when Apple was trying to market their products, the Apple II into Germany, they their European people wanted to have a train travel from city to city in Germany, filled with computers, and they were going to invite business people onto the computer or onto the train and do hands-on experiments with the computer. And I killed it. I came back and they asked me to go over and evaluate the program because it was going to be very expensive. And I came back and I said to Apple, don't promote it that way, because the German businessman didn't type. That, quite frankly, was beneath them. And in fact, the adoption of computers was very late in Germany because, quite frankly, the males wouldn't touch. They saw it as a typewriter, and they wouldn't use a computer. And it took a long time for actually Germany to adopt the computers. France was much earlier, and the UK was much earlier, but still the UK was somewhat behind as well. So culture played a big role in the adoption of new technologies. I'm looking at my crib notes here, so. After National, I worked with 2 startups, so I finally decided, and a lot of people had been trying to hire me into their companies at that time because it was a small community, and I had been with 2 fairly successful growth companies, and the sort of the word of mouth was very easily spread within the valley here. And so many little companies that were starting up asked me to go to work for them. And I basically decided to sort of go to work for myself and become an outsourced marketing company. And so in 1970, with $500 in the bank, I decided, and 3 kids, decided to start my own company. I basically told my wife that if it doesn't work, I'll go to work somewhere. In any event, it was fairly successful. I had, because I had come out of 2 semiconductor companies, I almost immediately had about 9 companies that were semiconductor company startups. They're spinning out and starting new companies almost every month. There were several companies starting here in the Valley in those days. So a lot of them became clients of mine. And probably the biggest sort of breakthrough in my life was that I had sat down and I made a list of companies that I wanted to be clients. I actually ended up getting every one of them. But not all clients do you want that you think you want. Companies look great from a distance, but once you get inside, you sometimes find yourself in a can of worms. But one of the clients that I wanted was Intel. Intel had started a couple of years before. It was founded by Gordon Moore, as I had mentioned, and Bob Noyce. Bob Noyce was, quite frankly, he was a very charismatic person. I know the world is crazy about Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs' hero was Bob Noyce. And they knew each other. I produced them actually. And Bob Noyce was the inventor of the integrated circuit. He founded both Fairchild, which was the beginning of the semiconductor age, founded Intel. He was a champion swimmer, diver, skier, airplane pilot. He did everything, and he was quite a person. He got the Presidential Medal of Freedom in the United States. And most people don't know who he is. He died far too young. But again, he left a legacy that had a great influence on Steve Jobs, tremendous influence on him. And it was largely to keep pursuing the leading edges of technology, which is what Intel did. I was a relatively small agency, but here was a client that was producing innovation for innovation for innovation. They created the first RAM, random access memory. They created the first programmable memory. They created the first microprocessor. And then each of those, so every month we were doing campaigns, both advertising and public relations and education campaigns on something different and something new every single month. We did that for almost 20 years. Because they were so prolific in innovation. But the world was really, really different in this day. There were no media hounding us for story. None of the major journals, such as Time or Newsweek or Business Week or any of the trade books had editorial offices here on the West Coast. They were all in New York. And not only that, but the financial analysts and the media basically scoffed at all these little companies out here trying to reinvent things and change the future because they were committed to large companies. In fact, one of the analysts at Merrill Lynch said, he wrote a paper on this, and he said, with analyst reports, and he said that if innovation is going to occur, it's probably going to be at a division of a large company because only large companies can produce the infrastructure necessary to bring that product to market. Well, the thing they didn't realize was that the innovations were what they were calling a 10 times performance advantage, and also a cost advantage, that they were destroying the old industries. The calculator businesses vanished. The large computer companies started to vanish. These companies were being essentially taken over from the bottom by these small companies that were nibbling into that with small and really significant innovations. So Intel became a very, very significant client. That was in 1971. And we had dozens of other companies. Now, Apple came in 1976. And it was Steve Jobs who called Intel to find out who was doing their work. And they referenced me. And so then Steve called me, and that's how we got the Apple business from day one. And the thing that for me was so significant in my career was having worked inside companies and seeing how the process itself was done. You know, I could talk to the engineers, I could talk to the distribution people, the salespeople, the president of the company, the financial people in the company. And these weren't big companies, these were relatively small companies that I worked for. And so you knew everybody in the company and you knew all the processes, you sat in on decision making. And so one of the things that young people like themselves, one of the obstacles is that when you go to work in a company where you're sort of sitting in a cubicle, but you don't see the rest of the organization. And you don't get a chance, like I did at National Semiconductor, to travel the world. I was marketing services manager at National. My boss, who was VP of marketing, his name was Don Valentine. Don basically said, I don't want to see you at your desk. I want to see you out working with customers, working with I want to see you out understanding the market. And so I spent over half of my time, not inside. I had people for me that would help develop ads and do those sorts of things. What I did was go out and talk to the world, get the information. How do you communicate with people who have never experienced something radically new in their lives. So the microprocessor maybe is a really good example of that. In case you don't know, this is the first really significant microprocessor. It's on the tip of my finger. That's the 8080 microprocessor. Well, Intel invented microprocessor in 1971, but there was no market. What do people do? The way people designed products in those days was by putting transistors on circuit board or integrated circuits on a circuit board, and then testing the board, and then designing and then putting it inside of some piece of hardware. Well, the microprocessor changed all. The way it did all of the electronics, but you had to program it. Programming means software. And so once programming came in, you could sit at a computer and essentially make that microprocessor do whatever you wanted it to do. So microprocessors sort of have universal applications. They are in machine tools. There's over 150 microprocessors in the Prius. There's over probably 500 in the Tesla. So cars that have microprocessors in them, computers have microprocessors, and often they're just variations of the same processing power. So these are in everywhere you see a little light blinking when you walk around your house or you walk around a building. More than likely there's some sort of technology behind it that is in the form of silicon. And so in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the average home had about 100 fractional horsepower motors. These little motors that ran hair dryers or your power tools and so forth. Well, today, the average home has maybe 5 processors or microchips in it. So we've moved to solid state without you even being aware of it. And yet that took a vast amount of education by advertising, public relations, essentially just one-on-one training people how to use the new technology and transition to it. One of the things that we did, and we did a lot of ads at the end in the 1970s. At one point, my company was the largest, what they then called industrial advertising agency in the West. And we did just do the technology, but we did lots of other things as well. We have a very, very large food service organization that worked for a dozen restaurants, like chain restaurants and so forth. Merrill Lynch was a big client. And so we had lots of other clients, but the primary driving factors I came to realize was really the technology that changed all business. The public relations became sort of key. And, I'm a sort of a anti-advertising, anti-PR person. If you read my books, I really dig them a lot. Largely because I think it's the conventional way. It's when I sold my ad agency to Shive Day. Jay Shive was the one who did the 1984 ad route. And when I sold that, I basically became what I call a market relations company and did market services, because it was more than just simply one of the differentiated PR, because we kept moving further and further into the organization and our clients and trying to help them develop strategy. When I mentioned before why ads sort of failed so much, when I first came to California and from one of these small companies, it wasn't the advertising, it was the product. It was most often it was the product, and many times it was the management. There were so many other factors that the advertising is expected to overcome, that as you back up, you find out that really, without a solid sort of understanding of the strategy within the company, and the more you advertise a bad product, the faster you bought a business. So many of these companies were trying to and as I tried to get off the ground by advertising, when in effect, it was something else within the organization that was creating the problem. One of the biggest complaints of consumers is that the product isn't available, it's been advertised. And so, when you think about just jumping forward, what makes Apple so successful, about it is its design or its advertising or so forth, but it's what it makes it so successful is its logistics. Apple is the number one logistics company in the world, and they have been for the last 10 years. That means that they distribute products that's sourced all their components. They have it manufactured in China, but think about an iPhone which has 1,000 parts in it. Those 1,000 parts have to be sourced from different suppliers. They have to arrive at the factory at the same time. They have to build 50 million of these things. 50 million. You think about 50 million little screws you have to work to put the back plate on. I mean, all of these logistics have to come together, and then it has to end up in your store that's not too big. And so, that logistics system that's put in, and then that logistics system is an information system. Apple knows, Steve Jobs used to say, you don't do any research. That was baloney, by the way. They had all the data in the world. Because I would go into meetings, and the first thing I would ask him for is to see your data. And he would tell me the data. So, he liked to think that it was all about his genius, but it wasn't. He relied a lot on the feedback from customers. And he was one of the most prolific person going out, visiting retail locations and stores, asking everybody who knew about products so that he could absorb the information back in and change the products as a result of it. So logistics becomes a very key factor. We used to call it distribution. And it's one of the things that used to be under marketing, but that has moved away from marketing. Now the VP of logistics in most organizations on that part that used to be part of marketing. The transition from an era when, particularly in PR, became very, very significant. And in those days, as I mentioned, the engineers in the 70s and even into the 80s, they actually read the journal. And so as a result, and technical articles became a very significant part of it. So, I have a bunch of technical writers. I hired them all from technical magazines. And we wrote the articles for our clients. Very, very serious technical articles. I mean, most of the people that we hired had engineering degrees. And so they wrote the technical articles, and our people would place them in magazines. But because there was no one out here really beating a path to our door, we had to go back to people constantly and places like that. So I did a lot of trips on my own. And I would carry, just like I do showing you, I would carry all these devices, I would educate the editors, sit down with them, and I explained to them. And then we started writing what we call backgrounders. And when we introduced a new product, we did a detailed backgrounder on it, and I wouldn't let my people put adjectives in. No, this is a breakthrough, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Make it very factual, make it very detailed, because quite frankly, there's already a built-in discount factor on the PR and promotion. So then you actually make it less promotional as you can. And how I started to educate people was I started holding quarterly, what I call evening with dinners. And I invited the senior editor of a magazine or a journal or a newspaper to bring his staff to California and have dinner with the presidents of leading tech companies. And so I had Time Magazine, Fortune, Forbes, this is Graham from the Washington Post, who was, probably one of the most prominent publishers in the world, for that matter. They all brought their whole editorial staffs, and then I would invite my presidents and these marketing of my clients, but not just my clients, people who work with clients. And so we would have these evening dinners, and there were two rules. One was you could ask any question, both sides. The president of a company could ask a question of the journalist could ask a question of the company. The only other rule was nobody could write anything about it. And believe it or not, everybody adhered to that. And so they began these discussions back and forth because engineers by nature are skeptical of me. They don't like the press. And so this really broke down the barriers. Andy Grove, who was the president of Intel, told me that the best advice I ever gave him was, he called me, he was a client, and I gave him a list of the 10 financial analysts and the 10 journalists he should get to know. And I said, it's up to you. They don't want to talk to me, they want to talk to you. So I facilitate getting my clients and media into constant communication. And, it's very hard to do today because people, I can tell you that major companies, I've gone in to help address them on solving PR problems, for example. And the PR people will come in and I'll say, well, have you met with so-and-so? Have you talked to so-and-so? They say, well, no, but we've sent them emails. And so, that doesn't work. And the emails they literally get tens of thousands. They get tens of thousands of press releases. But what it facilitates is really getting a person, even to the and I can tell you that because I still get a lot of calls to just sit down and explain the world of journalists. Let me talk a little bit about, so in effect, by doing that, and then what changed everything? Well, what changed everything with the journalist world was the personal computer. So these little chips that I'm talking, nobody really got too excited about them. I mean, they were hard to write about, and it's like every company out with a new one every week. And nobody could understand the difference between one or the other, and in fact, most of the people couldn't. But what changed everything is the personal computer. All of a sudden, these things started showing up in graphics departments, and they started showing up on journalist desks because they started using these technologies. Most of the pundits today on personal computers really were people with no technical backgrounds who started using the personal computer. They got so excited about it, they suddenly began doing more stories on it, investigation, and interviewing the companies and producing these products. So personal computer made it personal, something they could put their hands on. This is why this is so discussed today. It's technology. It's probably the most sophisticated technology. This has more technology than the moonshot by far. The U.S. put a man on the moon. I mean, tremendously far. That was very primitive technology at the time. It couldn't fill up a thing. It doesn't. This technology has at least 1,000 to 3,000 times per phone. This isn't a phone anymore. The phone is actually a very small part of it. It's now a computer that allows you to essentially have a window on the world. And so all of your products and services now come through this window, either the one that I'm using here in front of me, this one, or some form of a window. And so the shapes and forms of those windows, how they present information today becomes extremely valuable and important. So the personal computer changed everything. And I think the one person who did understand that was Steve Jobs. In 1979, he gave a talk at my company. He came up and was meeting with some people. And he talked about using the computer part. He said, the biggest obstacle to personal computers is the fact that people have to learn how to use them. His goal, 1980, was to build a computer that people didn't have to learn how to use, that you could simply pick it up and use it. Well, it took him a long time to do it. He said he was going to be able to do it within a decade, but it took 30 years to do it. But he did achieve that with the modern technology. You don't see any manual navigated switches, didn't like any kinds of instructions or things on the device itself. Repeatedly, just simply using it. So today, that's really sort of Apple. That's their sole driving focus behind most of their development technologies. The people don't have to learn how to use. The interface is so pleasant and easy to use that it becomes sort of second nature to use. Now, after my company really grew fairly large. I sold off the advertising to Regis, who was my agency at National Semiconductor in the 60s. He was a good friend. He was a large consumer agency in New York and the West Coast, but he also understood technology. And his and as I said, he's the one that came up with the concept to Apple for the 1984 campaign. His advertising was really based largely going back to Doyle Dane, who built this sort of white space, nice big picture across 2 pages or 1 page, sort of clever, humorous headlines. And Jay Shai took that to the next level. I then, when I reformed my company and sold it, I started pretty much from scratch and started on market relations. Now, we did do what you call traditional PR. But in addition to that, I had a large strategy group. That I hired people out of the business schools, and I hired people from McKinsey and other consulting firms, so that we could move a little bit further downstream and help the company before it got to become an advertising or activity. And here's the reason, and that is that the advertising agency and the public relations people are combined. They're caught between sort of the media, who is constantly looking for an objective truth about a company, about a product, about a service, about management, about financial situations. And when the internal depends on you as PR people or advertising people to create what's called image. And an image is a perception. And so I can honestly tell you that I've been in the circumstances so much, been in meetings where when we did our research and came back and said, your paid products aren't working. The customers don't like them. And I've been told, your job is not to tell us about what our product can and can do. Your job is to create an image. And so keep up, create the advertising. And so you are put into this complex. And my first thing is, and I used to do a course on public relations, and somebody reminded me recently that my first chapter was Know Yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to have a great deal of knowledge and integrity about yourself to be able to stand up and to compete and debate in those circumstances. And it's not easy, and I understand that. But more and more of the companies simply want to set an objective and have you carry out the course of that objective. And that becomes difficult. And particularly, it's difficult in small agencies. I used to tell people, and I've threatened to resign every client I get, anytime. I threatened with Steve Jobs. I told him, I'll go find someone else many times. And I used to tell them, I'm not economically independent, I'm just independent. And I think that one of the criteria for it is to be independent. And I'll tell you how I want to think about doing that. In advertising and public relations as an agency, and we were fairly large. At one point, we had about 250 people here in California in one office, and so it was fairly large. We had 9 offices around the world, Tokyo to Paris, and so we had offices a lot, and it was a fairly large agency. But I never belonged to any advertising association or fellowships or fraternities or any of those things. I never joined any PR organizations. And got dinged a lot for it. But I did join Semiconductor Industry Association. We were the only non-manufacturer that was a member of the Semiconductor Association. We're the American Electronics Manufacturers Association. We were a member of that, and we were a service company. So we went to so we joined our clients' organizations. And so I went to all the computer conferences. I went to the user groups. I tried to learn as much about my client's business as I possibly, and it doesn't take away from what you do. It helps it, because now you can sit down independently with, say, a journalist, and you can essentially be somewhat forthright about your knowledge about what's going on at that particular client or your company. So over the years, I just kept spending my time more in my client's world rather than in the PR world. I didn't, honestly, maybe I was arrogant enough to think, I didn't think the other PR agencies could teach me. And I certainly didn't think any of the other ad agencies could teach me. Largely because I thought that we were keeping up, we were moving. The technology was the driver. Remember, technology drives marketing. You could not have mass media or mass market without mass manufacturing, without automated manufacturing. So mass manufacturing had to come before you could have mass markets. And as you move forward, then the TV became the eighth demonstration, an 8 foot. So television drove marketing. Then computers, the ability to segment markets. It came down to because one-to-one marketing can only be done if you have programmability. So that you can program the customer, what you know about the customer and what they need together with your solution. So all marketing is driven by technology. So I don't know if you remember, what was the movie? I forget the movie. The movie about the fall of Nixon, and they said in it, follow the money. And here you follow the technology because the technology creates the next to life. Now what we have is this sort of infrastructure and technology that most people aren't aware of. The technology has moved from what's called transactions, which are a pretty organized, structured way of looking at data. You go to the retail store over the counter, that's a transaction. That can be recorded. That's put into a computer list somewhere. All of the mailing lists are structured data. It's put into some form or other that can be accessed, stored on a computer. Well, that's one way, but the new technologies are moving at such a rapid rate that we move from real time to actually streaming data. We can now essentially analyze data at the rate of billions of transactions per second. So think about everybody in the world going on at the ATM at the same time. All of those transactions are being held at the computer system and are instantaneous. There's no delay. All the retail activities are run that way. Every retail business in the world is run on a computer system. Everything. You can't inventory all the products, for example, in a grocery store, because there's an average of 150 to 200 to 300 SKUs in even the smallest of grocery stores. People like Walmart, others have literally thousands, tens of thousands. And you can't inventory those. So you've got to have a scanner that scans the device or scans the code, and you have it at the cash register, and you have it in just-in-time delivery. And so all of those kinds of things are in a control retail marketplace, and they're able to evaluate who's buying what product, what amount, and in what quantity and where. And so retail all over the world, most modern retail, except for the mom and pop shops, are run on computer systems and have to be. And of course, it's moved into everything. And so streaming data, which is what now transition is to move from, how many of you have heard of the word big data? Must have heard of the word big data, right? Big data, what it means is that you have all this structured data. It's data that's on lists that you can print out on paper and you can see it. And then you have unstructured data. That's all your tweets, your Facebook messages, all of the various things that you do on the databases that really track you around and track you with your friends. So there's unstructured data and structured data. Now, unstructured data was really hard to organize. How do you organize random amounts of information? Because this big data is characterized by huge volume of data, huge volume. We are moving to what's called zettabytes. A zettabyte is, 10 to the 16th zero. So it's a huge amount of data. And we are doubling that data every year. And that's data coming in from your cell phones and your tweets, all that sort of stuff that's deluging the networks. That's unstructured data. Now they're able to correlate that data, structured data. And that's where I think marketing is going to be revolutionary, is the ability to essentially take people's unstructured data, how you think, because you're expressing through the medium of your cell phone or some other form of instant communication. And they're correlating that with all traditional databases and doing it in a microsecond. And they're doing it for billions of people at the same time. I know it sounds mind-boggling, but this is happening. I'm literally on boards of companies that are built this technology, several of them, and it's quite astonishing to me. Every time I go into a technical meeting, I come out saying, "How does this work?" And it will, and big data, as it evolves, and it's still new, just like the cloud is changing everything, will restructure and take marketing. Just as the mass production did, just as the automobile changed marketing, just as television changed marketing, and just as the original computer changed. This new way of data and data management is going to change the way marketing really operates in its internal systems. What else can I tell you about? Well, I want to tell you a little bit about, we can get into Steve Jobs and